Hey folks, as we get started, I wanted to let you know about my friend Lorenzo. Lorenzo is a custom knife maker at One Sun Knife Designs. You can look him up on Facebook under One Sun Knife Designs. Also, you can look up his website, www.onesunknifedesigns.com. Lorenzo does some fantastic custom art pieces, but he also makes high-end functional knives as well. So if you're looking for a one-of-a-kind kitchen knife set, if you're looking for a really unique set of steak knives, or even if you're just looking for a nice little cheese knife with a cutting board, check out my buddy Lorenzo and check out his unique designs. Again, check out Lorenzo at One Sun Knife Designs. Hello and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host Greg Payne coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Hello everybody. I wanted to introduce today's guest, Vinnie Tortorich. Vinnie is a celebrity trainer. He's a podcaster. He's a best-selling author. He is a documentary filmmaker, as well as owning 3 different companies, all related to healthcare and fitness. And Vinnie is also just an all-around great guy that I've come to know and really like over the years. Now, Vinnie is going to be on talking to us about the influence that his grandfathers and great-grandfathers have had on him. I just want to let you know, with everything that Vinnie has going on, I'm going to put links to his website, to all of his different companies and his documentaries, all in the show notes, so you guys can check him out there. But just for easy reference, his website is vinnietortorich.com, VINNIETORTORICH.com. And his book is Fitness Confidential. You can find it on Audible. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it, I think, maybe even in Barnes & Noble. The other movies that he's had is Fat a Documentary, and that one has been on Amazon, on iTunes. That one has been widely distributed, so check out your favorite viewing outlet for documentaries, as well as Fat a Documentary 2, which is coming out January 1st. So sit back, relax, pull up a chair, get yourself a beverage, and enjoy the conversation. Hey, Vinnie, thank you for stopping by the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I really enjoy you taking time out of your busy day and talking to us a little bit about your grandfathers and your experience with the grandfathers.
Greg, thanks for having me on. I'm not a grandfather myself, but wow, at 58, I still think about my grandparents. I was very lucky in that way. Well, at least on my dad's side, I was. His father was around until he was 93, almost 94. And he was a major influence in my life. His name was Mike Tortorich. My mom's dad died when I was very young of a heart. He had a massive coronary and just died, which was odd because the guy was a football player. My understanding is when he was a kid, he was a football player, and he was a Golden Gloves boxer. He was an athlete, and when he died, he didn't have a stitch of fat on his body. He wasn't, it was one of these rare things where he just passed away. But he was around until I was 5. And oddly enough, I have memories of him and, how I interacted with him. And there was also a great grandfather in there on my mom's side. He was around until I was maybe 17 or 18. He died. He was well over 100. He was basically an ancestor. He came here from Reggio Calabria, from Italy, and the things I learned from that guy, you would have trouble learning those things if you went to YouTube, because I went to YouTube to try to remember something that he had taught me. I was trying to figure out the last step. And it took me a while to find it on YouTube, and everything is on YouTube, right? They didn't have this. They didn't have, and I could, if you want to later on, I could tell you that story.
Yeah.
But yeah, heavily influenced. That maybe it's the Italian culture. If anyone remembers the TV show Everybody Loves Raymond.
Oh yeah.
The mom and dad lived right next door.
Right.
I grew up exactly like that. And as a matter of fact, the show wasn't written about me at all. But one of my closest friends was one of the executive writers for that show. And she was always asking me what it was like because she was from the Midwest. And she was like, tell me, we would go hiking in California. Right. And she would say, tell me about your grandparents. Tell me about your life. You know, we need to add flavor to these stories. So,
and then they would show up in some of the episodes?
Yeah, every now and then I would see something, and especially if I saw that, you know, Kathy Stump was the main writer in that episode, I would go, okay, there's going to be some, you know, Tortorich or Giardina-centric stuff, you know. And it was never like a storyline. It was always nuance, you know, about how the mother comes in and starts picking at the wife, and or how the father was with his kids, and on and on and on. So, yeah, it was kind of like that.
Now, your grandparents were first generation or immigrated, right?
And some of them were. On my mom's side, my dad's parents, you know, my great-grandfather on that side died when I was so young I don't remember him. But in most cases, the grandparents were all, you know, they were born here, especially on the Tortorich side. They came in that wave in the 1920s or 30s.
Okay.
And some of my mom's family came much later. And so there was a lot of Italian with the older generation, a lot of Italian spoken when I was a kid. And it's weird because I was just talking to, you know, one of my nephews. I was down in Louisiana, and he's Italian. He doesn't feel Italian. He doesn't know what Italian means anymore. Like the new generation, they just call themselves American. My generation, we still said, well, I'm Italian American. Not that it meant anything other than in my generation, you know, if you're a German American or Irish American, you said the title, because some of those, you know, we got that from our grandparents because they were still associating with the old country, I think.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, and just culturally, too, like, especially, I think, with sports, right? Because it would be a big thing when the Italians backing, like, DiMaggio and some of those guys, and there was a lot of, I think, cultural pride, and rightly so. And
yeah, you know, sports are a very interesting thing. Because you can look at boxing. I'm a big boxing fan, but I don't know that much about boxing. But every underdog group that came through this country, or I guess you could say Western Europe too, got into the sweet science. You know, and it was always the underdogs. The Irish, you know, had a run at boxing for a while. The Italians, Marciano, Graciano, you know, all those guys had a run for a while. The Mexicans had a long run. The Jews had a run in boxing for, you know, people, we always joke and go, oh, Jews aren't good athletes. No, they, you know, Max Baer Sr., his son was Max Baer Jr., who played Jethro on the Beverly Hillbillies. He killed a man in the ring. You know, it was one of those deals. You know, he was Max Baer was just a ferocious fighter. And he was a Jewish man. And then blacks came along, and it was their sport for a while. Now it's anyone's sport,
right?
You know, and now they're using hands and feet. It's everything changes at some point. But you know, think about the heyday of the black boxer. You know, Muhammad Ali. You know, Frazier. You know, I mean, my age group, we romanticize about those guys. I mean, we all wanted to be Muhammad Ali when we were kids.
Oh, or Foreman, or any of those guys.
Foreman was another one, yeah. You know, it was pretty amazing. But whenever I would talk to my great uncles, my grandfather's brothers, you know, they were all in WW2, and they would talk about Marciano and Graciano and you know, Jack Johnson, who was an
Yep.
early adapter. He was a black man from before the war. So yeah, it's all pretty interesting, I think.
No, definitely that identity is something that runs through just about every cultural group, and it's not a bad thing. But it's interesting to watch how that transition from saying initially coming over and I'm Italian to I'm Italian American to I'm an American, happens because culturally those, your grandparents and great grandparents probably held really firm to a lot of the traditions they had as far as even probably getting up in the mornings, food, menu items, work ethic that you could have said, you could have dropped them back in Italy and it would have been right back in place.
Yeah, you're right. And going back to this, just to let your audience know, I did something that I never thought would ever happen in my life. I went back to Louisiana for a little over 6 weeks because my mom needed help. She fell and broke her knee and her shoulder. And my dad is too old to take care of her. So they were going to have to get in-home help. And I was like, someone's going to come in there, the in-home person. Who knows who else that person's helping? They could bring COVID in. These people are old. So I decided to go down there and take care of my mom. And my nephew was over one day, and he, by choice, he's a journalist. So he's always asking questions. So my dad is his grandfather, and he was there one day, and he stayed for 5 or 6 hours. And I was we were telling stories of why my dad is so bullheaded and still does the things he will do. When you hit a certain age, it's like the world passes you by, but he's still living off of the things he heard his parents say, my grandparent.
Yep.
I happen to be the conduit there. My nephew was sitting there dumbfounded going, wow, Grandpa, you actually think that, this, that, and the other thing. And I was sitting there saying, well, let me explain to you why he thinks that.
Yeah.
Because here's what I heard going on when I was 9, 10, 11, 12, basically 48 to 50 years ago. So it's just a very interesting thing to watch.
Well, and it's interesting too. You bring that up because I was talking with somebody else about these stories that I'm collecting about grandparents, and like in your case, you essentially have maybe almost 100 years of family memory still with you, right? From your great grandfather, your grandfather, your dad, and then passing that down to your nephews and other people, is that within you've got those memories that have been collected. Now, we all know grandfathers can sometimes BS with the best of them and change stories around and things like that. But to your point, you're able to essentially interpret a little bit and say, no. Here's the place and time where those memories and those attitudes came from, and be able to explain that.
Yeah, and it's funny that on that fateful day when we had that long conversation, there were moments when my dad would say something that, I could tell my nephew was raising his eye, going, really? Come on. And I would just straighten it out because my memory is different than my dad's and probably more accurate. And I would say, no, this is what he's saying, but here's what actually happened. And it's always a reasonable facsimile. It's just that when they get older, sometimes there'll be an amalgamation of 2 or even 3 stories.
Right.
And because he'll say, oh no, that was Vinnie. I remember that was definitely you. And I'll go, no, it was Michael or it was Mark, but that wasn't me. And then I remember specifically that was you. And sometimes you could go pull a picture up and go, no, look.
Yeah.
And he'll go, oh yeah. And my dad still has all of his faculties, all of his senses and everything. He doesn't have Alzheimer's, and he's a history major and he remembers history like there's no tomorrow. But when it comes to his own history, when you have four boys, the stories can get mixed up and interchanged and meld into a brand new story that literally never existed.
Yeah. Well, you get the memories that all kind of blend together.
Yeah.
And that's how, I mean, well, in even the writers, right? They'll take 5 or 6 different stories, kind of blend them together, and then here's the TV episode, or here's the book, or whatever you get. And it's kind of an amalgamation of all that.
No, you're exactly right. You're 100% right. But going back to grandfathers, you can learn a lot from them. I was mentioning my great grandfather a while ago when they were in Italy. They were fishermen, and they made their own nets.
Oh, wow.
They didn't just go out and buy nets. They made their own nets. And now here's this, when I'm a kid, I guess he was in his 70s, late 70s, 80s, probably. No, he's already in his 80s. He lived to be well over 100. So let's say he was in his 80s. He just seemed ancient to me. He barely spoke. He spoke broken English. He didn't even call me Vinnie. He called me Benny with a B. Benny, do this, Benny, Benny. And he taught me how to make nets.
Okay.
And he taught my older brother how to make nets. And basically, these old Italians, they would use 2 sticks. And the sticks were maybe 3 or 4 inches long. They weren't very long. But that was the size of the hole that would be in the net, right, for what they wanted to make. So the circumference of the thing. And I remember you would twist it, do this, tie this, flip this over, pull this through. And you would just do it really fast. And we were making nets for him all the time. And he would go fishing with those nets. And I remember one day, a couple of years ago, I called my brother Mike. And, of course, my 2 younger brothers don't remember the nets. They were too young, right? And I called Mike and said, Mike, when Papa Tripodi was showing us those nets, what was the sequence? And he goes, oh, if I had 2 sticks and some string, I can show you. So we were on the phone, and he's in his shop. He goes, oh, hell, let me just go in. And he was like, wait, how do you start again? Wait, do you loop it underneath? And we start yelling at each other. No, it can't. And like I said, I went to YouTube, and it took me several hours to figure, maybe an hour and a half, to figure it out on YouTube. It was there.
Yeah.
But even the great Google couldn't come up with what this old Italian man taught me in one afternoon.
And I wonder too, because with that generation, teaching you how to build a net and use it, I mean, that's a skill that if you get fired, if you get whatever, that's a skill that you have to at least be able to go catch some fish and sell them at the market, right?
Yeah, well, they owned their own, the Giardinas, the Tripodis, they owned their own fish market. It was the Italian fish market. And they caught a lot of their own stuff. It wasn't like they went down to the market and picked it up and put it in the fridge. My understanding was they went out for days on end and brought in what they brought in. So there was seasonal catches, there were crabs and, down in Louisiana, crawfish and you name it. It was all there. But they had to work at it,
Was that what brought the family to Louisiana, was the fishing in the Gulf? Because I was going to ask you about, why didn't you guys end up in Boston or Chicago, New York, Baltimore?
Yeah, the normal place where Italians end up.
Right.
A lot of Italians went through Ellis Island and came through those ports. What most people don't know is that New Orleans, the port of New Orleans, a lot of Italians went through there. Now, as far as, Papa Tripodi, this old man, he was just a stowaway on the ship, so
okay.
That's, he hopped on a ship that was going to America. I don't think he had much understanding as to where that ship might stop. So he got here that way. I know the Tortoriches made a choice because when they left Sicily, they were what they called croppers. They were farmers. And they heard that if you went through New Orleans, there was a lot of farming. You could farm cotton or rice or any of this stuff in the South. And they basically worked, they didn't own anything, they didn't have any money. They worked as basic sharecroppers when they got here. Nobody was giving them a dime. So, and they saved up their money and bought little pieces of land here and there. They never became big farmers, but they became small farmers.
Yeah, but the thing is that's interesting is they came in, and then if I remember, some of the story and the background, right? By the time they hit the shores, started working as sharecroppers, started getting some land put together, they were able to put your mom and dad through school to where your mom and dad became school teachers and then ended up in the middle class within a generation.
Let me see how that went. I know that Papa Tripodi became an American citizen, I want to say in the 1950s. And the Jardinas were here a bit before that. But it's weird because they were educated in Italy. They came here and tried to learn English as fast as they could.
Mm-hmm.
That was my understanding. And they were proud to be Americans. And, they all got Americanized as quickly. They integrated as quickly as they could. They wanted to be good Americans and speak English. But none of them could really afford college, not even a little bit. Not even if they were given a full scholarship. Well, most of the Tortoriches, I know my grandfather, and he had 11 brothers and sisters. There was 12 of them total. No, he had 10 brothers and sisters. There was 11 total. Same mom, same dad. If someone had given them a full scholarship, there was still no going to college. They had to work. They were born to work. But within that one generation, yeah, they sent my dad. My dad was an only child, and he went to college. He went to LSU. My mom was one of two kids, and on her side, she was the first one. She went first, and then her brother, who became a scientist, was right behind her. So these were not dumb people by any stretch. They just couldn't afford education past high school.
Right. Well, and that's what the kind of the sense that I was getting, because I do know too that you'd mentioned that your grandfather had been a janitor and had worked as a janitor. So, and my guess is he probably had a couple of different jobs. Maybe worked the vegetable patch or the farmland, and then went in to work as a janitor. So you're probably seeing or remembering him with a couple of different jobs, maybe.
Well, here's the deal. When I was a young kid, he drove a truck, and it was for the bulk mud companies. So in other words, these chemicals that they would use in oil wells when they were drilling, when gases would come up, they would drop what's called bulk mud down there. He fell off of one of the trucks one night and got a really bad concussion. So I'm going to weave a story about this man, Mike Tortorich, that you're not going to believe. You're going to think I'm making this up.
Okay.
But I'm not. He got a job at the Ascension Parish School Board office. The job called for 3 people, 3 janitors. But when he got the job, he was the only one. The job description called for him to be at work from 8 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock in the evening. He never took a day off. He never took a sick day. He did that job for 35 years. Not one sick day, not one day off, not one vacation day. He went there 5 days a week, except he didn't get there at 9 o'clock. He got there at 3 o'clock in the morning. He worked until 8:30 and came home by 9 o'clock and ate breakfast. He would also have a quick breakfast in the morning. But he would have another meal at 9 o'clock. he would lay down, he would sit on his lounge chair. Think of like an Archie Bunker type lounge chair.
Yeah, yeah.
Lazy boy type thing.
Right.
He would set it, he would lay it back, and for exactly 15 minutes, his eyes would be closed. I don't know if he was napping. I never saw him look up and look at his watch or anything. We lived right next door, just like everybody loves Raymond. I was always at his house. 15 minutes later, his eyes would open. He would get up, get in his car, and go back to work. He wouldn't leave there until 6 o'clock in the evening. Now, he was supposed to be there from 9 to 5.
Yeah.
He got there at 3. He left at 6. The job called for 3 people. He did the whole job by himself, and every now and then they would send a young guy to be his apprentice. None of them ever lasted more than 1 week. And they all said, he's insane, he's crazy, nobody can work this way. You got to remember, Louisiana gets really hot.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The man did the job of 3 people for 35 years, never took a day off, never took a sick day or vacation. Now, you would say, man, a guy like that, he must get home on Friday night, crack a beer, right?
Right.
Well, I don't ever remember seeing my grandfather have a drink, ever. Not a beer, a wine, whiskey, nothing. On Friday night, he would get home and watch Walter Cronkite on the news. He would take a bath, and he would go to bed at around 8 o'clock. By midnight, because I was always sleeping over at his house, by midnight or before, the phone would ring. It was the same bulk mud company, General Mud was the name of it. By then, half of their driving crew would be halfway in the tank from drinking. And when these oil rigs needed this bulk stuff, they needed it right now. The phone would ring and he would have his clothes ready to go. He would just slip them on like a fireman and out the door. He would drive all Friday night. You would see his truck right in front of the house. You know, I'm talking about like, you know, semis. These are semi trucks, you know,
Okay.
the big long bed. The truck, you would see it Saturday morning or Saturday midday parked in front of the house, diesel engines, so they leave them running.
Right.
You know, you can hear it out there. He would come in. Now, remember, there's no cell phones. There's no, hey, honey, I'm coming in. He would come in. My grandmother would have food ready for him. He would sit and eat. He would sit on the chair for 15 minutes, get back in the truck, drive all day Saturday, make a couple of more loads, come in that night, fall asleep at around 8 o'clock. They would wake him up somewhere around midnight. He would drive all through the night, all day Sunday, get some sleep Sunday night, and never missed a day of his real job on Monday. I'm going to tell you the most amazing part about this. The man never made more than minimum wage. And we're talking about the time when minimum wage was $2.50, $3,
if that.
maybe that. Guy never made more than minimum wage in his life. He died with well over $250,000 in the bank.
Holy cow.
Do that math.
Yeah. Well,
Do that math.
that's incredible. So were you, when you were seeing him working like this and you saw him, you know, not going out and getting the new cars and not doing a lot of the extras, what kind of an impression was that leaving on you in your young years and your teenage years?
Oh, he was a force of nature. You saw it. It was palpable. It was palpable. And by the way, the kindest man on the planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're asking me how, you know, so take me and my brother Michael. Do you know what an Irish twin is?
Yes. In fact, my wife and her twin brothers are Irish twins.
Oh, wow. So that, I guess you would call that Irish triplets.
Triplets. Yeah.
One of a kind. Well, for the rest of your audience, it's probably a derogatory term now, but I'm an Irish twin. Me and my older brother Mike are 1 year apart. And that's always been where people actually think you're twins because as you're growing up, you're about the same size and you look pretty much alike. So I'm the younger of an Irish twin. My brother after me came almost 5 years later, and my youngest brother came. There's 10 years difference between top and bottom. So if you look at my life and you look at my brother Michael's life, they're very similar as far as work ethic. I'll give you my life first, and I'll give you Michael's. I own a coffee company, I own a vitamin company, and I own a food company. By the way, I never had a rich daddy giving me a dime. I grew up with very middle class. My parents were school teachers. I started 3 companies and own 3 companies. I run all 3 companies. I also do 5 podcasts a week for myself. VinnieTortorich.com puts out 5 shows a week. I get up early and I stay up late. I work. I get tweeted. I probably send out 200 or 300 tweets a day, minimum. I answer every tweet. It's a work ethic you just don't see anymore. That's the point I'm trying to get to. Last year I put out a movie. I'm not a movie maker. This year I'm putting out another movie, right? Yeah. This is on top of 260 podcasts a year. This is on top of Pure Vitamin Club, Pure Coffee Club, and S&G Foods. And this is on top of all of it. It's a work ethic that comes from that man. There is no weekend in my life. There is no weekday in my life. There's only you wake up and you work. And by the way, his father was the same way. My great grandfather, one I never got to know. His thing was you work until you die. Just work until you die. Now, does that make for a boring life? No, I do things with Serena, and we have a great time. But work is, if you're not working, what are you doing? And that's the way my life is. And I don't know if that's for everyone. Now, you take my brother Michael. Michael has been a mechanic his whole life, and he owns a tow truck business. He's on that truck every night. At one time he had a bunch more trucks. Let's call it 5 or 6, I don't know, maybe 4. And he had other people. Now he's just got one other guy because he'd rather have a smaller company. And, he could be at dinner. If that phone rings, you could be in Baton Rouge. He's driving up in one of those big, giant flatbed tow trucks. Because if the phone rings, he's getting up from that dinner and he's going to handle it. He could be out all night, all weekend. Where do you think that comes from? You think me and Michael, you think we thought of that on our own? Hell no.
No.
We saw it.
Well, and the other thing is, what if it had been your dad doing that to you? Because I find that, when we're in our natural rebellion stages and stuff, we turn away from that stuff. But when you see grandpa up doing it, right? Like my grandfather was a farmer. He's up at 4:30 milking cows, getting the irrigation ditch going. He's doing all that stuff. Then he's taking a job as a rural postal delivery guy. Then he comes home. Then he's working again. I mean, that's visible to me, and it's not somebody I'm going to kick back against. What are your thoughts on that grandpa showing that work ethic versus maybe if it's coming from dad? Not to slam dads and not to say we don't get that from dads, but it's a different it's a different voice,
Well, my dad was a real cerebral type. He was he was a history major. He was a school teacher for 35 years. Worked hard at his job, was very good at his job. My mom was the same way. My mom was a school teacher for the same amount of years. The difference is when they got off on Friday, when that whistle blew on Friday, it was the weekend was theirs. Now, they didn't sit around, again, never saw parents who drank or did drugs. They just didn't. So the weekend was keeping up their yard, the appearance of And I felt like my parents tried to put on some airs. I think it was the generation they grew up in, where you had to pretend to be a little more than you actually were.
Sure.
And I'm not sure that was a bad thing, but they probably drove a little more car than they could have actually driven to kind of it was kind of to keep up with the Joneses, the 60s,
Right.
70s. And I remember being confused by that every now and then, because like we had a really nice shiny car, right? And I would say to my dad, hey, I was into sports really big. I went to school on a football scholarship, and I was like, hey, Dad, there's this camp. The sports camp this summer. It's $100. I need $100. And he was like, I don't have that kind of money. And I would look outside and go, but you have a Cadillac. You're a school teacher driving a Cadillac. And it's not fair for me to judge how my parents wanted to spend their money. But they were all about living just slightly above the means, right? And I never saw that from my grandparents. I mean, my dad did not like hunting at all. And I think for him, it meant that that's what happened when he was a kid, because they grew up so dirt poor, right? He felt like if you had to go hunting, you couldn't afford to walk into a store and buy meat, because that was a real reality just one generation before me, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that my dad was making money using his brain, and he could go to the grocery store and buy a cow, and we didn't have to eat rabbit, that was a big deal. If I'm making any sense at all.
Yeah, no, you definitely are, because I remember those stories from my grandfather too, and we're only about 8 years apart.
Right.
Where coming up through the Depression, coming up even just after the Depression, I mean, he's going deer hunting to put actual meat in the freezer because we're not going out and buying a cow. We're not able to stock up that way. But you know what? For 50 cents or whatever a round of a 308 is, back at that time, he could go out and get a deer, and then that's food for the family. So it wasn't that recreational that like maybe you or I enjoy going out and kicking back and fishing. And if we catch something, great. If we don't, we don't. It was a case of like going out and I've got to get something because that's how I'm going to feed the family.
Greg, my grandfather used to tell me this, and again, it's a story, right?
Sure.
But I'm sure the story wasn't that far from the truth. He said, my dad would hand me 5 shotgun shells, and it was a single shot shotgun. I have the gun.
Okay.
In my possession. I used that gun to hunt when I was a kid. It still works, by the way. It's still a functional gun. And his story was my dad would give me 5 shotgun shells and said, you better come back with 6 rabbits. Now, again, a bit of an exaggeration,
sure.
But he was expected to come back with food, right? Here's 5 shotgun shells. And I now have a life where at least 4 mornings a week, I wake up before I start working and I go out to a shooting club and I shoot skeet. And I never shoot less than 75 rounds of ammunition. We shoot 3 rounds.
Yeah.
Sometimes we shoot 4. And then on the weekends, I'll go out and I'll shoot maybe 8 rounds in one day. And when I think about it, I always think of my grandfather as I'm loading another box of shells into my pouch. It's like, wow, this is 25 rabbits for him. If he knew that I was just sitting out here blowing ammunition down the range, it would make no sense to him, right? No. But because of him, I was allowed to have great parents who made education just paramount, right? And I understood that it was paramount because they put such a price on what education means that now I can literally go waste ammunition.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. As a sport. And I look at it that way. I look at just how fortunate I am to do that one thing.
Sure.
And it's the one extravagant thing I do, but it means that much to me. And I still think of my grandfather. Every time I smell the scent of an expended shell, because he taught me how to shoot a shotgun. He taught me how to use it correctly.
No, I totally get that. That's awesome. For so many people that I'm talking to, similar to yourself, everybody has that story of the sacrifice and the drive that they saw from their grandfathers. And it's one of those things where I always want to call out to other grandfathers. In my case, my grandson's 2.5 years old, so he's not learning much from me right now, except maybe how to wipe his butt. It reminds me and hopefully other grandfathers that, kids are paying attention. Your grandkids are paying attention much more than the trip to Baskin Robbins, much more than you recognize. And some of the work ethic, some of the thriftiness or not thriftiness, it's good and bad. Grandfathers have that impression on grandkids. And these have been awesome stories, Vinnie. I appreciate you sharing these things.
No, it's when you said you had a show about grandparents, I was like, I'm in. I'm so in because, they meant that much to me. And I remember my brother Frankie telling me a story once when my grandfather, the one I was just talking about when he died.
Right.
Frankie was all broken up at work and he missed it. Frankie never misses a day at work. He's always there, and he was broken up. He had to go home for the rest of the day. He missed the whole next day, and he was talking to a coworker, and this guy goes, "Man, are you okay?" And he goes, "Yeah, my grandfather died," and the guy was like, "You missed 2 days of work." He was like, "Yeah, this was like the biggest thing in my life. I mean, my grandfather died." And the guy goes, "Yeah, man, I didn't really know my grandfather. I don't know. Is he still alive?" It was like one of those deals, where he didn't know. So I guess it could go either way. And when you do have that close connection with grandparents, I don't think the rest of the world really gets how that goes.
No, that's such an individual thing. Like you and I can both know that our grandfathers had a huge impact on our lives. But the extent of that impact is something that's just deeply personal.
Yeah. Yeah. And not everyone has that. Look, a lot of people move away from home. I don't know if my parents will even be around when my stepdaughter has a kid. She's going through law school right now, and she's not even considering marriage or kids or whatever. But, so if she has kids, well, they'll never, they'll just never know. I guess I'll be the grandparent in that case, but in anything I can drag forward from my parents, that's one thing, but that's about it.
Right.
Right.
Right. Well, and that's what I'm meaning about, like, guys like you and me and other people. When you look backwards, we hold that family memory that the best we can do is then pass it on to our kids and our grandkids, stepkids, whatever that family looks like. And hopefully they take some of that with them. And it's not something that's just kind of dropped on the floor.
No, I couldn't agree more. They do matter. And I look, everybody's got their story, but I'd be willing to bet you'd be hard pressed to find someone that's got, more love for grandparents than I do. They all meant that much to me, and they were all different.
Yeah.
And not just the grandfathers, but the grandmothers.
Oh, yeah.
And the great grandmothers. I mean, the love of food and the, my mom's mom, man. I mean, the woman was full of life. I had two different types of grandmothers. I know it's a show about grandfathers.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, it's grandparents.
Yeah, that's fine.
My mom's mom, I can walk up to her and say, "Grandma, I just made the football team." And she would hold her arms out and go, "Vinnie, that's wonderful. Oh my God, you're going to be the best football player ever. And oh my God, you will be the best." Now, my other grandmother, I can go, hey, Grandma, I just got a shiny new bike. And she goes, oh, my God, you're going to fall off and bust your knee. You're going to have to go to the hospital. You're going to die. From a bicycle and a busted knee, Grandma? You went all the way to death?
Right.
How did you get there so fast? So, yeah, I think we take it all with us along the way. And I'm glad we do.
No, absolutely. So I've had you on for a long time, and I appreciate your time, but as we wrap up, is there one thing or piece of advice that you would give me or other grandpas about being a grandpa?
I think the one thing you have wrong, Greg, is that right now your grandkid is only 2.5 and you can only teach him how to wipe his butt. That's not true because, look, I don't have memories of my other grandfather at 2.5, but I certainly have memories from, somewhere in the 3s and 4-year-old and going right into 5 when he died. And I still remember things he said. I can still kind of remember the way he smelled. And the guy smelled like beer. No, I think he drank a lot. No, I remember him being, he would like grab me between his knees and pretend he was boxing. And he would go, oh, I'm beating you up. And I'm like sitting there as a 4-year-old going, it's because you got your legs wrapped around me, old man. And then he would let me come in and get a punch on his face and he would fall back. And
sure.
I mean, I was 3.5, 4 years old, and I have that memory. This guy meant that to me, right? So don't think that your 2.5 is not looking at you, Greg, and going, don't go punch your 2.5. I mean, you might want to slap him around a little bit. Just don't give him not a closed fist.
Right.
But no, so that's the advice. They don't come alive at some age. They come alive when they're alive. So keep that in mind.
I will. I appreciate that. And, Vinnie, thank you so much for your time. I've really appreciated it. And, maybe down the road, I can twist your arm to come back and maybe talk fitness with us a little bit later.
Anytime. And if you want to, Greg, I figure if I ask you while the thing is still recording, you can't tell me no. Would you like to come on my Saturday show and talk about your weight loss? You've lost some weight, right?
I have. And yeah, absolutely. Cool. I'd love it. Thank you. Holy smokes. What a great interview with Vinnie. I just absolutely love talking with this guy. Like I said at the beginning, he's been let's call it a virtual mentor. Somebody I've been listening to his podcast off and on for probably about 5, 6, 7 years. So one of the biggest takeaways that I got from this was just how young he was when he captured and had memories of his grandfather who passed away when he was about 5.5 years old. And something that I've really got to take to heart, especially with the youngins that are now coming up. The little things that I do with them, the playing around, the roughhousing, the gentle moments, reinforcing the house rules with them. All that stuff matters at 2.5, 3, 4, all of that matters. And the other thing that really came across was just how much love was in that family on both sides for the grandparents. How much sacrifice the grandparents had, what a leap of faith they had to come to the country and to build up a base that allowed their grandsons to operate their own businesses, to be successful in whatever path they went down, but to have that strong work ethic, to have that strong sense of family, to be able to do things with their hands and their minds, and just the impact in general that the family unit has on people. And, not everybody has it, and we recognize that, and not everybody's path is the same. But boy, when you go and ask people what could the value of having a relationship with a grandparent be, I think this episode is just a prime example of that love and that example. You couldn't ask for much more. So what was your big takeaway from this episode? I'd love to hear it. Please shoot me an email at greg@cool-grandpa.com or go to my website, click on the speak pipe, and leave me a voice message, and I'll be sure to hear it. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.